Welcome to Living Outside the Matrix, the show where we look at important issues and dare to ask the unaskable questions. Hi there, I'm your host, Nigel Howett, and in this episode, number 150, we are bringing to a close 2021. So I thought it would be appropriate to give some kind of a synopsis of where we are. We've travelled nearly 2 years into this interesting story that we're all subject to, and I figured it was a good time to sort of take stock of where we're at for an ongoing realistic appraisal of the landscape and the scenario so that I can best know how to act. And I think this is very important for all of us to do, to take an honest, cool-headed look at what's going on, even if it's unpleasant. So based on my own observations and my appropriate contextual knowledge of all the research I've done, I have concluded that beyond any reasonable doubt, a political reality of statism, of complete state control, we could call it communism, statism, tyranny, it doesn't really matter what you call it, but complete state control is now the de facto power structure in Britain. The precedent has been set with complete control being taken economically, socially. The government can step in under the assumption of this allegedly justifiable reason, which is, of course, protecting the public health from this alleged V threat. So a thin veneer of credibility serves to obscure from most people the fact that a principle has been broken, it's been breached, that principle being complete state control, because it is seen to be desirable and people are in fact calling for it. They're not noticing that the reason for the credibility, of course they must, they're doing it for our safety and all of this good stuff. That whole premise of germ theory enables the cover to be maintained for the narrative. And while this cover remains unquestioned, while nobody wants to go to the fundamentals and question the germ theory and the existence of the V thing, then there is no possibility of any change. So I wanted to share with you a few of my premises which form the basis of this conclusion. And if any of you have been researching for a while, if any of you have some experience at looking into things, you may well be with me on the same page, but there's a fairly good chance you might not be on the same page. So just for clarity, so that you can see where I'm coming from, I wanted to share with you the key coordinates, if you like, for my current conclusions. And the first one is that it's not all about money. Now, a lot of people, when they start to ask questions and look with justifiable suspicion at the world around them, they quickly conclude that it's all about money. And of course, money is absolutely crucial to lubricating the whole corrupt system. Money is not a villain in and of itself, but the problem with money is its creation and control of the supply has long been in the bag. Read The Creature from Jekyll Island by G. Edward Griffin, if you haven't done so already. And it helps really grasp that since the central bank in America, the Federal Reserve, was put in place, it's really been a done deal. Arguably, since the central bank in London the Bank of England was put in place in 1694, you could say that the money was a done deal from back then for those controlling interests who are the share owners, the shareholders, should I say, of the central banking system. But the point is that it's not all about money. Yes, money is used. It has to grease lots of palms along the way, and of course, it to some degree making money. Great, selling billions of pounds worth of these experimental medical treatments is of course good for the bottom line. But the main point is not just about money. It is, of course, more about political control. And this is the second point. The idea of control and a political agenda is not a secret. It's not any kind of conspiracy theory. It's widely published. Many of the big think tanks and the big families, the Rockefellers, if you're out there checking their Rockefeller Foundation, they're all philanthropists. They're all desperately trying to change the world, and they're all falling over themselves to tell you how good it's going to be and how we're all going to love it. The World Economic Forum and the Great Reset, we're all going to have nothing and be very, very happy with it. Agenda 21, Agenda 2030, all again very overtly published. All ties in with agendas for technocracy, for population reduction and the eugenics movement. These are all key coordinates that we have to be aware of in the overall climate of political control that we're in. And it would be incredibly naive to ignore for a moment the fact that men have been controlling other men with deceptive means ever since the dawn of human interactions. So we must grasp that there's a political agenda going on. It's widely publicized. Nobody's denying it. The voices calling for global governance are in perfect harmony and chorus from almost every quarter. And of course, it's all going to be for our good, and it ties in the environmental thing. But the point is, again, the second big point is political agenda. And anybody who is unaware of the wider political agenda, and I don't mean the manifesto of your local candidate for government, I mean the macro global political agenda, all of these things I've mentioned previously. This is the point, that there is an agenda of control. The third key coordinate, of course, is that propaganda is par for the course. Commensurate with that previous observation that it would be naive to not factor in that people lie. Some people like to manipulate others. To not factor in the whole concept of public relations and propaganda as it's been known to have developed and been developed over the last century alone. Check out the book by Edward Bernays. We know also that the mainstream media conglomerates are centralized in just a few, very small collection of individuals. So we know that the message is controlled, another key coordinate. I'm going to say here also that it must be recognized that the pandemic narrative serves the purposes of control perfectly. Now, before one draws any conclusions about the truth or falseness of any claim about the pandemic, one has to look at it just as a thing. Pandemic is a pandemic, and it's being managed as a pandemic on the assumption of protecting lots of people. You have to appreciate that that mechanism, that tool, that thing is perfect it's a perfect vehicle for the introduction of tighter political controls, for political control in general, for charaling people over here, for making them go there, from stopping them from doing this, all in their own interest. We have to acknowledge and recognize that as a thing is beautiful for anyone calling for more centralized global governance. That's a fact. Now, when you add into that the mystery of the V thing that's never been properly demonstrated to have any separate independent existence, when you look into this, when you check out the links below to videos where you can get a head start on where to look into this. But if you check out this fundamental premise, as a detective with an open mind, wanting to know what's true and real, let's hear all the claims. Let's hear these ones from there, those ones from the other side. Let's listen to it all, please, and listen for the rational argument. Where is this thing? How has it been proven? What's the mechanism of the proof of a causal relationship between the alleged harmful particle and the experiencing of any particular set of any particular set of symptoms, I hasten to correct. So as soon as you start digging, you realize that you're not allowed to ask that question. You'll notice, when we look at the phenomena of censorship, of course, you'll notice that you're not allowed to ask rational searching questions. Any questions that chip away at the foundations of the story are not allowed. Now, this should tell people something. It should be a big ding-ling-ling-ling-ling-ling alarm bell going in any rational mind. But when you start looking, you find not only do you get met with censorship and obstacles, but you'll find that to ultimately get to any proof of the idea of contagion, the fact that it's nailed down and proved, germ theory is called a theory. It's never been proven, it's just been contradicted lots. And when you dig for this evidence, you find that it's not there. That should again be a massive cause for alarm. The fact that there's no scary V thing and the theory behind contagion remains unproven and contradicted all points to the fact that any experimental treatments are completely useless. They have no purpose. If you take away the fundamental causal thing upstream that justifies that whole set of actions, you can see that those whole set of actions just crumble. They crumble under their own weight and fall down when you can see that there's no actual reason for them right upstream, logically speaking. The last premise that I want to share with you is the fact that there's little or no resistance. Now, there are some protests going on, I do admit that, and it's pretty good news that there are. And there are some great court cases happening that are pushing back against any ideas of mandatory vaccination in the States and here in Europe. There are successes where you could be forgiven for thinking, hurrah, sanity is last exerting itself here, But the problem is that really these are just isolated tiny fragments. And if I were in charge of this whole global operation, I wouldn't be concerned at all. Given the vast resources, the vast amounts of planning, the vast tidal wave of information, propaganda on side that's pushing the narrative forward, given the lack of predisposition of the average person to think beyond the end of their nose, let alone to reason in terms of fundamentals. When you think about how confused and busy the average person is just trying to get by in their life, the potential enormity of trying to understand this whole thing and grapple with the fact that it might be false, there's no real resistance happening. People are not questioning it. And this all adds up to a situation which we have to clock rationally and acknowledge. It's the new political situation we're in, and it's very bad news for human freedom and flourishment. Now, it's not all crashing and falling down immediately, but as I said, the precedents have been set. Everything is in place to just keep ratcheting up the pressure slowly, here, there, and wherever it's needed over the coming months and years. And this is what we're going to see. Well, here in England, at the close of 2021, we are dominated with the Omicron variant being in the mainstream news, of course, and the impact that that is having on the country. There are a lot of people being ill. I have noticed in my personal social circles, many people ill, a lot of them believing, of course, that it's the condition that they're told that it is. And it's very interesting to observe how culturally embedded the germ theory presumption is. But nevertheless, there has been a lot of colds and flu about. There are a lot of calls for more controls. It's been interesting to watch the debate in the mainstream media over here as the sort of government takes a sort of a stand back view, while they've all, of course, been bickering about Boris's Christmas party or not. But they're taking a relatively standoffish view, and you can just see that if this is allowed to play out and numbers of so-called cases go up over the Christmas season, there'll be people, of course, saying, I told you so, we need to lock down more preemptively next time. So whichever way it seems to go at the moment, whether there's a lockdown imminently or sometime in the new year, it seems that the story will be played to the advantage of people who want to lock us down more readily. There are calls in the hospitality industry to clarify rules. People demonstrably want to be told what to do by the government at the moment, it seems, here in the UK. We still have the censorship, albeit on private platforms, of course, essentially private social media and so forth. But this is effectively not allowing all reasoned debate and questioning of the narrative still. And it should be a warning flag to any rational thinking person when sensibly questioning things becomes allegedly harmful. So generally speaking, here in the United Kingdom, we're seeing the public on board with the narrative. They're very much going along with it and likely to be calling for the next lockdown, I would say. And it kind of gives the lie to the claim of people power. Many people out there might like to think that the people have the power. At the moment, very demonstrably, they don't here in my country anyway. They should. And an informed, fully conscious population that has knowledge, of course, can't be controlled. And that's the ideal that we need to work on. That's the ideal that we need to aim for, is to live in a fully informed community. And this really brings us on to the last part of this podcast, which is to ask the question, what could we do? The bottom line is we must educate ourselves and attempt to educate others. That's the difficult part. And all we have is reasoned argument. Reasoned argument, a respect for the facts, and educating ourselves is what we must do. Then we must attempt with any friends, relations, family, in whatever circumstances there may be an opportunity, we must attempt to introduce reasoned argument, to questioning the narrative. What if this? What if that? Doesn't this look odd? Maybe we should question that. Doesn't this look, etc., etc. We have to try to encourage question asking where we can see that it's absent. But we also have to be careful not to be aggressive truth tellers. We have to spot circumstances that present themselves or opportunities very carefully. We can't just steam in there and presume to educate people, because people find that offensive. So it's a very difficult challenge, But we all have a huge vested interest in living in a world full of rational people, educated people, fully conscious people. And we can all play our part towards that. And we have to, as I said first, educate ourselves, work on our own education and maturity first, and then try to gently persuade. And gently persuade we must do. I must stress that I'm an optimist, and I think that the truth will out eventually. I think that reasoned argument will win eventually. The only question is, how long will it take? And if we all engage, or the ones of us that are committed to doing something proactively and increasing our own knowledge and trying to share that knowledge, if we engage and participate with the conversation, and this can mean following the news. Some people often say the first thing to do is to disconnect from the news. In some respects, when you've recomposed yourself, keeping one eye on the propaganda can be a good strategy for the active truth seeker. If you're managing your sources of information, keeping one eye on the mainstream stuff can be really useful. But be engaged in the conversation. We must remember to participate. It doesn't serve our interests to think that we can hide away in our own bubble. Unfortunately, eventually the macro political situation will always bear down on us. So I'm an optimist in the long term. I do think we can turn this round. If we carry on engaging and using reasoned argument, I think there's every chance that we'll do so in the not too distant future. So thank you very much for all your support this year and previously. Have a great festive season, and I wish you all the very best for 2022. Remember to visit the website lawfulrebel.com. Stacks more on there, and I hope you'll join me again in the new year for the ongoing series of podcasts Living Outside the Matrix, which will now revert to once a month. I'll be doing the show once a month in order to make time to produce my book, The Truth Seeker's Guide, which I hope to be coming out this year. So while that's going on, the podcast will also contain a lot more about this idea of the Truth Seeker's Guide, a practical method that can help us in the challenging task of discerning truth. So thank you very much, and catch you again on the next episode of Living Outside the Matrix. Be the change you want to see. Be